Thank you. So yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the UN House. I'm happy to have you here again. So this briefing today, we are basically going to talk about the United Nations World Data Forum that is being held in Hangzhou, China, from the 24th to the 27th of April. The participants for this forum will essentially include member states, civil society, private sector, and my colleagues who've joined from the UN Statistics Division from New York at a very early hour. I'm thankful to them for that, but they will do the briefing for you. It will essentially be Ms. Francesca Perucci, who is the Assistant Director of the UN Statistics Division, where she oversees the work on data for development, open data, data integration and dissemination, and other global data initiatives. She's also joined by Mr. Ian Mark Rutherford, who's a statistician at UN Stats Division. He has worked on official statistics for over 20 years, with 12 years of international experience in the UN and 8 years in the national government. Over to you, Ms. Perucci.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for this opportunity to brief you about the UN World Data Forum 2023 that will be held in Hangzhou, China at the end of April. There is increasing recognition that better data is needed to inform decision making at all levels, and also to inform policy making and to track progress from the local to the global levels. Rapid expansion in new sources of data, new technologies, and other data solutions has offered new opportunities to create partnerships for better data for all, and in particular for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is why there was this decision to offer the new space to come together at the UN World Data Forum under one roof, and to bring together leaders from government, the private sector, science and civil society to discuss collaboration, showcase innovation, and identify potential partnerships in support of data for the 2030 agenda and for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, but more broadly to offer data to all citizens for better lives. This is the fourth UN World Data Forum, and it's the first in the Asia and the Pacific region. The forum was agreed by the UN Statistical Commission, which is the intergovernmental body that oversees the development of data and statistics globally. And it was based on a recommendation by the UN Secretary General's Independent Expert and Advisory Group on the Data Revolution for Sustainable Development. As you might know, the first UN World Data Forum was held in 2017 in Cape Town and resulted in the launch of the Cape Town Global Action Plan for Sustainable Development Data. That's a document that has led and guided the development and the work and the development in the data space now for the last 6 years, and is also recognized in a General Assembly resolution. The plan called for a commitment by governments, policy leaders, and the international community to undertake key actions in 6 strategic areas for better data: coordination and leadership, innovation and modernization of national statistical systems, dissemination of data on sustainable development, building partnerships, and mobilizing resources. At the following forum in 2018 in Dubai, the Dubai Declaration was launched during the second forum on the global community to boost financing for better data for sustainable development. Following that, we held a forum virtually. That was 2020, the year of the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. The forum focused on how to boost data capacity and partnerships to tackle COVID-19 and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The In 2021, the UN World Data Forum was held in Bern, Switzerland, and resulted in the launch of the Bern Data Compact. There was a call for action and commitment to invest in data capacities and data partnerships to leave no one behind, build trust, and fill data gaps to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So now with the UN World Data Forum 2023, that is taking place in the Asian Pacific region, we're building on the previous agreements, including, of course, the Cape Town Global Action Plan, the Dubai Declaration, and the Bern Data Compact, to address and advance innovation and innovative solutions to meet the data challenges for sustainable development and overall to improve data for citizens. So as we always say, we cannot achieve what we cannot measure. So improved use of data and statistics are crucial for development and to achieving the transformational vision of a better future for people and the planet, as we set out in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And now, I think my colleague Ian Rutherford will give you more details on the organization of the forum in China. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Francesca, and thanks, Shashi, for that wonderful introduction, and thanks to everyone over there at UN House for the opportunity. I'm just going to go and give a little bit further detail than what Francesca gave on what the event is. So we're about a month and a half away from the fourth UN World Data Forum taking place in Hangzhou, China. As the dates have been mentioned, I'll reiterate, it's April 24th to 27th. So we're all looking forward to that. So I think the UN World Data Forum is a kind of a unique global gathering for the data community. And it does have some, I think, uniqueness as an event. It's a kind of an informal gathering in some ways. I mean, there are formal parts, but I think broadly it's an informal gathering of very different sectors that are interested in data. So as I think was mentioned at the beginning, like the private sector, civil society, the UN system, governmental bodies, and of course different parts of government deal with data and statistics, but in particular our key constituency that we work with often at the international stage is the national statistical offices and the national statistical systems of which they're usually coordinating. And if you look on our website, you'll see some further details of the kind of partners that we're working with, particularly on the program committee, and that's on our website, undataforum.org. So this year, the key thematic areas, and Francesca, I think, gave a really nice overview of broadly the direction of travel, but we've really simplified our key kind of themes that we're looking at this year, and that's the sort of thing that you would expect under a kind of a data umbrella. Things like innovation and partnerships. That's very much a part of what was the discussions early on in the 2030 agenda around the data revolution, talking about inclusive data, around the innovation and partnerships, talking about maximizing use and value of data in order to have better decision making. The next theme is around trust and ethics in data. This is a very topical thing at the moment, and I know is something that we're looking at very carefully, and these discussions are really gonna, I think, help us move forward on things like that. And then finally, kind of emerging trends and again, partnerships is reiterated there, because I think in future partnerships just become more and more important in this area. So moving to talk a bit more specifically about the event. So as mentioned, we conduct this event now in the hybrid. We've had a lot of experience of that over the COVID period. Has kind of forced us to think a little bit more in terms of two audience, an in-person audience and a virtual audience. We'll have probably about 2,000 people in person in Hangzhou, China. And last time we had more than 10,000 online. So this is the sort of numbers that I think will only grow. In terms of the program, so there's over 100 events on the program. There's your sort of 70 typical parallel sessions, panels. and plenary sessions. But we've also this year, to really encourage the in-person attendance, is that we'll have learning labs, demonstrations, exhibits that you will only be able to experience it on site, so that that in-person experience, there's a value to traveling. And of course, the networking and everything, while you can do that online, I think in person, that's much more attractive. So then to the logistics. So in-person registration is still open. So there's still an opportunity to apply to attend and travel. I think there's still some time. Flights to China, I think, are slowly increasing. So that's good news. And you can do that until Wednesday, the 8th of March. So only a couple of days left, but that's in-person registration. And again, further details on our website, undataforum.org, as well as we also have our Twitter, which is at @UNDataForum. But if you're not able to join us, then as I've mentioned, there's an online participation. Most of the parallel sessions and the plenary sessions will be broadcast, some even fully virtual. And we will be launching an online event platform, which we have used in the last 2 sort of iterations of this forum and found very successful. I think it helps a lot with the inclusivity of the event. As I mentioned, sort of having thousands online. And so again, look out on our website. We'll be launching that in April. And yeah, thank you. Back to you, Shashi.
Thank you. I'll now like to hand it over to Mr. Christopher Garraway, our economist at the Resident Coordinator's Office, and Mr. Alan John, the Data Management and Monitoring Officer at the Resident Coordinator's Office.
Thanks, Shashi, and a big thank you to Francesca and to Ian, our colleagues in New York, for joining us virtually. It's nice to see you here, and thanks for giving us a reason to convene the journalists here in UN House. Since the COVID days, we're trying to do this more and more again. So we're before COVID, we had a lot of these meetings, and we're glad that we can bring everyone together around this important event taking place in China. Just from our side here in the United Nations in India, just a few thoughts about why this UN World Data Forum is a particularly important and timely event from the Indian perspective. You know, this is a very important meeting of the global data and statistical community. And I think in the year when India is becoming the most populous country in the world, I think it's a great moment for some of the data innovations and experiences that have taken place in this country to be highlighted in this data forum. You know, this year was also the midpoint of the SDG journey. And we all know since the COVID shock and the shocks that have followed, there's a sort of a polycrisis of challenges are facing SDG achievement across the world. And we've seen progress reversed, and it's really imperative that we focus on the data and the evidence that are out there to understand these reversals of progress and how we can correct course to accelerate achievement of the SDGs and reverse those reversals of progress. India's own SDG monitoring experience, I think, has a lot of lessons for the world in that respect. My colleague Alan will speak about that a little bit, but you know, India has put into place a really impressive array of data and statistical tools to measure SDG progress at national, state, and local level. And as the most populous nation, this is really a crucial thing. And the progress over the last 7 years has been really impressive in this regard. From the National Indicator Framework that was completely put together by the government with help from the United Nations, you know, and refers to the Global Indicator Framework. The National Indicator Framework contextualizes SDG monitoring from an Indian perspective. And now, with the help of the United Nations in India, Niti Aayog and MOSPI have supported the states in putting in place state monitoring frameworks, and even down to the district level, and in some cases, the panchayat level. And this is, I think, an impressive accomplishment that has a lot of lessons for the kinds of SDG monitoring that needs to be taking place globally. And of course, beyond those official sources of data, there are also a host of grassroots initiatives taking place across India from both civil society and the private sector. And we in the United Nations in India have been particularly involved in trying to help those initiatives monitor progress for vulnerable groups that have been left the farthest behind in some cases. Despite the dramatic achievement of SDGs across the country, there are pockets of lack of progress. And I think the more that we can use citizen-generated tools, local tools, benefit from the kinds of advances and innovations that Francesca and Ian were referring to, I think the better off the country is and the world thereby in this SDG journey. And finally, this is also a particularly important issue when it comes to India's own global leadership, which is we're really seeing highlighted this year through the G20 presidency. And actually, one of the narratives in the G20 India presidency is a shift kind of that I think we're seeing now for the last 7 years of SDG achievement, we've been focused on data on the SDGs. And now India is leading the way, trying to make an argument for data for the SDGs. And I think that's very much in the spirit of this World Data Forum. The data for development proposal is a key part of India's proposed SDG action plan that is being deliberated on at the development working group of the G20, the next meeting of which will be in the 6th to the 9th April in Kumarakom, Kerala. And this data for development idea, I think, stems from India's own experience with the very impressive digital public infrastructure that the country has put in place over the last 7 years or so of SDG implementation. And this so-called India stack, the digital stack, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, our colleagues in New York may not be as familiar with, but it is publicly enabled data standards and architecture that allow both the government to deliver services to all Indian people, but also allows the private sector to innovate on top and provide services in that way. And the unified payment interface, the Aadhaar identity program, these are this India stack is something that actually could really be emulated at scale across the developing world with impressive results for SDG achievement, in our view. We saw its use in the resilience and recovery from the COVID pandemic, from the way that it could use to allow citizens to move around during the COVID pandemic. And now it's something that I think is on offer, and not just in the context of the G20, but through initiatives like this World Data Forum. So I think India has a strong lesson to teach the world in that respect about using data to accelerate the SDGs. And with that, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Alan, who is an expert in some of this SDG localization initiatives to ask his thoughts. Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. And also thanks to Francesca and Ian for joining us today. Thanks to our friends in the media for coming over to UN House for this briefing. I would like to give a bit more details about what Chris mentioned briefly, the data tools that we use for SDG progress monitoring. So the SDG India Index, it's a very important tool for SDG progress monitoring and is developed jointly by the UN system in India and NITI Aayog. Now, because we believe what gets measured gets done, as Francesca mentioned. So right from the beginning of working on SDG framework, it was realized that we need better monitoring systems, we need better data and reporting system. So this resulted in 2018 in the creation of the SDG India Index. So this is a principal tool for SDG progress monitoring for India at the national and state level. So this is something that the UN in India and NITI Aayog jointly developed. What it does, every year it measures on a scale of 0 to 100, where does the country stand, where do the states stand in terms of SDG achievement in each goal, and also a composite measure, putting everything together. This was first put together in 2018. It so far has 3 editions. The latest one came out in 2021. So and it we could clearly see what the impact of this tool was. Of course, this is something that was purely and strongly based on data, indicators, administrative data systems, and numbers. So we saw that this was a very important reason. The index was a very important reason for the states to take SDGs very seriously, because when it came to ranking, they wanted to do better than their neighbors. They wanted to do better than how they did last time. So they put a lot of efforts into improving the data systems, making sure that the actual numbers that they have on the ground, the actual progress, gets reflected in, let's say, the ministry data sets, in data sets owned by other bodies. So they put a lot of efforts in improving those measures. They also put in place things like, let's say, state indicator framework to measure SDGs progress, a district indicator framework. And like Chris mentioned, there was an effort even at the panchayat level that happened. So the index, which is a very important part of the whole SDG monitoring system in the country, can take a lot of credit for improving the data systems. Now, this was at the national level and the state level. But there is one more tool which the UN system, especially led by UNDP, the Ministry of the Development of Northeastern Region and Niti Aayog. So these three partners came together and developed something called the Northeastern Region District SDG Index. Now, there they went a level down. They went to the level of districts and created a very similar monitoring tool for all the districts of the Northeastern states, all the 8 states put together, around 120 districts. So the ministry wanted something, a tool which is very comprehensive to develop the progress of the region as a whole. They had something which they developed in 2009, but something which had a very limited scope. They wanted something which is more holistic and which covers a lot of areas. So the ministry plans to use it to gauge progress at the district level. And the partners are working together on coming up with a second index with a refined set of indicators and updated data. So these are some key data efforts that we have been working together on with the government of India. And we see that because of these, there has been a lot of interest generated, and we can confidently say, and we can share with others, we can tell the states can learn from each other. We can report to, let's say, when we go to New York or when we go to the HLPF, we can say that these are the areas where India is doing well. These are the areas where the states need a bit more push. So we are very happy that we have these tools to guide us in terms of where to concentrate and what to prioritize. Back to you, Chris.
Back to you, Sachi. I hope that's been helpful. Glad to answer any questions. I'm sure the colleagues online as well.
Any questions? Please identify yourselves and if you want to ask any questions. Sure.
I am Sagar. I run a media company. So my question to both the data experts, that UN data is a far sighted, because you have to have the data of the 196 countries. And the nation has to keep the data of 627 districts. So how far the data by the international organizations and the data by the national state matches? Is it matches 100%? Or is there any discrepancies? Or are you satisfied? Or what can be done? Because with the advent of technology, the data has become more and more, better. Because 2005, before 2005, Indian Statistical Department used to do all these data. So any comment from you, sir?
How do you want to do this? Should we ask the colleagues online if they'd like to weigh in on this issue about national versus international standards? And then we're happy to say something on the India context. Francesca, I see you nodding your head. Please feel free to answer.
Yeah, thank you. No, this is a topic that I think has been so widely discussed at our intergovernmental processes, but I would say every time we work with countries, and we do a lot of work with countries in support, to their national and subnational statistical and data systems. What I would like to say here is that data at the global level serve a different purpose that data at the national and subnational local level. Data at the global level are supposed to inform the global policy discussion, and so they are supposed to be harmonized, and there's a little bit of adjustment made from what we receive in the global system, data system from national and subnational level. So obviously there are differences. As it was mentioned just a moment ago, it's important to move from data on the SDGs to data for the SDGs. So I think our focus has been very much on, and that's why we do the data forum, and that's why we created this space. Our focus has been very much on enabling countries at the national and subnational and local and city level, at all levels, to produce the data that are actionable and that are needed to inform citizens, to inform policies, to inform decision-making at all levels, to allow for progress and for sustainable development, to achieve the SDGs and to accelerate progress, as we all know is so much needed, right? So there are discrepancies. Our work focuses not so much on resolving those differences, because those differences are sort of unavoidable, for the simple fact that we need to harmonize the data at the global level. And we focus very much on working with countries in countries to support the work they do to inform their decision making. So that's what I feel very strongly, and we feel very strongly about it, that we don't want to focus on those differences that much, but focus more on the implementation at the country and the local level. Back to you.
Thanks, Francesca. If I can just add one thing about the India specific context, and I mentioned this before, over the course of the implementation period of the SDGs, the United Nations in India, through the resident coordinator, has had a partnership, an important tripartite partnership with NITI Aayog, with the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. It's called the Data for Development Coordination Forum. And through this mechanism, we convened at a sectoral level committees with relevant experts from each specific UN agency to support the development of the National Indicator Framework. Now, the National Indicator Framework takes its cue from the global framework that was negotiated in New York, but it contextualizes it to the Indian specific data availability, and also geographics and what the different ministries, what data is out there. And I can tell you that this is an ongoing process, and we've already seen the National Indicator Framework revised. I think it's 3 times now so far, and this committees are still, the relationships are still there. The memorandum of understanding was just renewed again as we begin a new 5 years of cooperation between the United Nations and India and the government of India. I don't know, Alan, if you want to add anything about that, or no? I think, and we're happy to talk about other issues and put you also in touch with the specific sectoral experts who have advised on some of those issues.
Any questions on the data forum? Yeah.
The question is, you will be collecting data. Will you take from the government sources? Mostly. Then it is a government data.
In the case of the National Indicator Framework, in fact, it is the government data. The government gets it all from specific line ministries. Actually, MOSPI collects very little data. They basically go and take what is available from the line ministries. And if there is a need, they ask the line ministry to improve the collection of that specific data on that specific sectoral area.
So your work will only just be to compare the data of other countries. You put them together.
That is the work of our colleagues online in the UN Statistics Division, and it's not an easy task. And I'm sure they can tell you about that if they wish. Francesca?
Yes, we do take, normally the way it works, we collect and compile data from national governments on the different topics. And that's the job of the specialized agencies. So each agency works on their specific domain, their area of expertise. ILO on labor force statistics, WHO on everything that concerns health indicators, etc. And they have a process of compilation, gathering data from national governments. And that's the adjustment I was referring to earlier. And then they harmonize the data if there are different definitions or different age groups, etc. They harmonize the data for comparability and to be able to aggregate at regional and global level to inform the global policy discussion. So they are all government data. They're all official statistics. And there is also a process of validation from the global statistical process, the global statistical system with national governments to whenever data are adjusted. So the countries see the changes and the adjustments that have been made. I hope that clarifies.
I believe you had a question on the data forum.
I'm Shyam Sinha from Buddhist Times. Sir, I just wanted to know, you have some broader vision regarding the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal. But do you have some work in the Buddhist countries in Southeast Asia? Do you have some data, whatever the plans you have done, and how much it is adopted there in that Buddhist country?
We don't target any region as such when it comes to, let's say, our work on data. So what we do, we use international platforms. For example, let's say the high-level political forum on sustainable development. This happens in New York at the UN in every July. So there we participate, we try to talk about our work that we do here. We talk about the work with the government, we talk about our SDG work, we talk about our partnerships. So we would like to present our work, our learnings to a larger global audience that way. Plus, yes, Bangkok as well. So that's at the global level. At the Asia Pacific level, which includes Southeast Asia as well, we work closely with the SCAP. We go there. For example, we had a side event at the Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development in March last year. The UN in India, in partnership with SCAP and Niti Aayog, held a side event there to talk about the experience and learnings that we have in this country, which could be used by the countries of the global South. Maybe the SCAP colleagues online can say more about that, but that's what we usually do.
So I'd like to take the focus back to the data forum here. Ian, would you like to maybe talk about the thematic areas that the data forum is focusing on? And also if a little more details about how, I mean, if journalists, what is expected out of the data forum and how can journalists benefit from this?
Yeah, thanks, Shashi. Yeah, so I think I mentioned that the four thematic areas around innovation, use, trust, and emerging trends. I think for journalists, I mean, there'll be opportunity to follow the parallel sessions online. So, but particularly the high-level plenaries, I think are usually where we get some high-level speakers from both the host country, but also the region. And at the moment, we're busy trying to confirm some names there. So we'll hope to share that with the UN office there, that they can pass on to you once some of that is confirmed. But yeah, generally these high-level plenary events receive a lot of attention. They're very successful in when we had them in Bern 2021 and of course in the virtual forum 2020. Thanks.
Any more questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Sanjay. Questions to Alan and to Mr. Yan. So we were attending one workshop, I think it was an Niti Aayog, possibly you were there, when the report was released, you know, of the Northeast, right? That's about 2 years back. And I was just reading about the thematic areas. So I wanted to understand when talking about this thematic area 2, where it mentions literacy, and then it mentions data journalism, and then it mentions the last misinformation and abuse. So how do we all take care of all these, you know, points? How do we prevent misinformation and what exactly data journalism means? Because like, as you said, you know, as he was asking, so you're doing it through one of the government agencies who are doing it for their own welfare of their, you know, Northeast in particular. And the media, if it's a big media, so they have their own data. So means how do you really coordinate with them?
See, I think the government is responsible for the data that it collects and it produces. So let's say the indexed report that you are part of, where you're there. So whenever we work with the government and we produce a data report, we make sure that at the end of it, there is a metadata section, which clearly defines the source of the indicator, the numerator, denominator, the computation method. And there is another appendix which has all the raw data. I mean, in the index part, in the first part of the report, you might only see derived numbers, ranks, scores. But if you go to the end of the report, you will clearly see the actual raw data, which is, let's say, a state-wise table for each indicator that we have used. So I think once whoever who is in charge and responsible for data also shows accountability in an equal measure, I think misinformation can be reduced. So anybody who has any kind of question about any of the indicators that were used can do his or her own verification by going to the source that is mentioned here. Mostly these days are available on internet. There's no need to get a physical copy of anything. So I think the producers of data must be accountable. I think that applies to journalists as well. I mean, maybe Chris wants to add something.
Yeah, just to say one of the issues, and this is something that we've encountered a lot in the Indian context because it's such a vast and large country. And we've been increasingly, many of the different agencies of the United Nations operating here have also been experimenting with this in different degrees. The idea of citizen-generated data and allowing communities to collect their own data. I think this is really the principle of data SDG localization, if you will. It gets to this accountability issue that Alan was mentioning. These are exactly the kinds of things that are enabled by the types of innovations that they're going to be discussing at the Hangzhou summit in a few weeks. And we have been working with different civil society groups as well as different UN agencies like UNICEF to see to what degree we can help those community groups who want to collect their own data, make sure that there's a certain minimum set of standards. And we've actually been working with MOSPI to try to come up with some type of guidance on the use of citizen-generated data. There are really interesting examples from around the world. For example, in Kenya, there's an interesting guidance that was put out by the government. And so we'll see how that work develops. But this is a really lively and innovative field. And I think this 2,000 participants in Hangzhou in the end of April and 10,000 online, I hope that we'll be discussing this in one form or another. I don't know, Francesca or Ian, if you have anything to say about this type of issue.
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking very much along the lines of what you just said, right? Those issues can be addressed by engaging citizens and by creating inclusive data and statistical systems. And that's very much what we'll be discussing at the Data Forum in a few weeks. Just, the work on citizen-generated data was just approved by the Statistical Commission last week. And that's a big achievement for this community, the recognition that it's by the engagement with citizens that you can create better data and ensure accountability, but also ensure that you give a voice to all groups, especially those that are normally completely invisible in the data. So the Commission approved our work, our proposals, and the partnerships and the collaborative we have established with civil society organizations and academia. They've approved the development of conceptual framework so that we will be able to also guide countries and expand the work in all countries in this area. And those are things that will be discussed. That's why we bring together people under one roof, as I was saying earlier, at the Data Forum, so that we have this conversation with civil society organizations, with policymakers, with journalists, with private sector, so that we can create those partnerships and advance the work in this area. I see Nena also wanted to come in on this point because I think she's also done a lot of work. Nena, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. You did. Good day, good morning, good afternoon. Colleagues from India, namaste. My name is Nena. I'm here from the program committee. I just wanted to hop in and say the reason we fought and got the World Data Forum is so that we can exactly have citizen-generated data. We can have a larger forum, a way that is inclusive, that has statistics on one hand, but other data communities. And as we have emerged from the pandemic and we're growing into the artificial intelligence, the field is broadening. And I'm happy that India is passionate about this forum. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, my question to you, Indian colleagues, is how do you think that the ideals, the products, the initiatives in India can be well presented, promoted, shared across all the data communities that will be in Hangzhou? That would be my question to you. Thank you.
Just one question, Ian. When is the virtual registration starting?
Virtual registration will start at the beginning of April when we launch the online platform.
Right. So I don't think there are, would anyone like to ask any more questions? Sure, please, ma'am.
I'm Santosh Mehta. I'm an independent journalist. I would like to know some details about Cape Town Global Action Plan, because I'm not aware of it.
Would you like me to take that?
Please.
Yes, so the Global Action Plan launched in Cape Town, that was done in consultation again with all these different groups, right? It was sort of the way to bring together the different needs from the different parts of the data and the statistical community. We have a lot of plans and we have a lot of agreements, as I mentioned, through the intergovernmental process, but that concerns only the official statistical systems. What the Global Action Plan does is really bringing together the different parts that we all try to bring under this efforts to improve data. So civil society, private sector, especially academia, and covers different strategic areas. From the foundational data programs to the more to the different aspects on how you use the data, how you communicate the data, and also covers aspects related to supporting countries, improving the financing, establishing partnerships to improve the data. So the plan was endorsed at the Data Forum by all the different parts of this global data community, and has been sort of our guide over these last few years. It's currently being revised to update it, given the enormous amount of work that's been done over the last few years. So taking into account the work done and the progress made, and also taking into account the multiple crises that we've been facing. So with a specific focus on how to tackle those specific challenges given by the more recent crisis, and the very slow progress on SDGs, on the SDGs, and how to address that. So in China, we will announce the work being done on the Cape Town Global Action Plan, and next year at the forum that will be held in Colombia at the end of 2024, we will launch a new plan. Back to you.
Sure. Oh, Chris.
And this is Chris again. If I can just respond to something that Nana brought up about how we in India want to try to share some of the ideas that have been happening here. I mentioned briefly in the discussion earlier, and it's something to keep our eyes on. But currently in the G20 deliberations taking place in India, India has proposed this SDG action plan, an action plan for accelerating progress, to be adopted by the G20 countries. They have kind of three transformational areas that they call enablers or multipliers that they want to focus on. One is women-led development. The second is the just green transition. And the third is data for development, as I said before. And one of the concrete deliverables of that process that is being discussed in the G20 meetings is creating a sort of G20 data for development, capacity building network or network of sorts, which I'm sure if that does see the light of day, it would work very well, I think, with some of the initiatives being undertaken by our colleagues in the UN Statistics Division in New York. And this year as well, what's really interesting is the Delhi summit, when it is agreed, when the final G20 communique is agreed with hopefully a Green Development Pact in the beginning of September, it will come just 10 days before the SDG summit in New York. And I believe already we hope that if the action plan is agreed at the June ministerial of the development ministers here in Varanasi, that we can already start socializing the implications of this at the high-level political forum in New York to make sure that all the member states of the UN are involved in the initiative. And also under the understanding that the next two G20s will also be taken by developing countries. So Brazil has the G20 presidency next year, and the year after South Africa. So it's a real important moment for this premier world economic grouping of 20 major countries to get closer to the UN and help the UN and all of its 194 member states realize the ambitions for better data for development. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, colleagues from New York for joining. We'll close this. Just a reminder, 2 days left for the in-person registration, and the virtual registration starts from 1st of April. Do visit the website. The links have been mentioned here, and follow us on the Twitter handle that's there, so that you can get updates on what's happening at the forum, before the forum, and the outcomes of the forum. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ian and Francesca.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you.